Thelma and Louise meets Indiana Jones meets The Devil Wears Prada. This is chapter 19 of Author Talks with Lisa T, and if you like any or all of those titles, then you're going to love the latest historical fiction novel from Fiona Davis. So buckle up, pack your love of history and your fashion sense as we dive into The Stolen Queen.
Fans of your book can always count on you to take us behind the scenes of a storied New York City location, whether that's the New York Public Library or the Chelsea Hotel or a Radio City Music Hall. The Stolen Queen is no exception. So tell us a little bit more about your story set at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Sure, yeah. They're a lot of fun to research and write, I have to say. And this one is set at the Met Museum in 1978. And it's partly from the point of view of this very serious curator who's a 60-year-old woman named Charlotte. And she is very unwillingly teamed up with a 19-year-old overeager assistant to the Met Gala in order to track down a stolen artifact that they're both very personally invested in. And part of the book takes place in Egypt in the 1930s when Charlotte was a young woman and just starting out in archaeology. And I like to say it's about mothers and daughters and female friendships, and there's hidden secrets and a deadly curse, of course. And it's a mix of glamour and mummies.
What kind of book about Egypt would it be without a deadly curse?
Exactly.
I don't know about you, but the Temple of Dendur at the Met has always been my favorite exhibit at the museum.
Oh, it's fascinating. And the history behind it's so fascinating. It's from 15 BC, which is actually pretty recent, considering, Egypt goes back 4,000 years BC. And it was so interesting because in the 60s, Egypt was going to build a dam, the Aswan Dam. And once it was built, it would flood the Nile Valley, which would just decimate all of these temples. And so there was this multi-country effort to save them. And New York got the Temple of Dendur, and they dismantled it in 68 into pieces. And it was brought to New York, and it finally opened in 78.
Your story takes place right around the time that this wing of the museum opens.
Yes, so that exhibit hall, yeah. So the Temple of Dendur hall, I guess you'd call it, and it's so beautiful, with these all glass walls, and it's just this stunning location in the Met, and the temple's there, and then there's this reflecting pool, and then this huge plaza really around it. And so when they hold the Met Gala, that's where they hold it, because they fill it with tables, and there's a dance floor, there's music, there's lights, and it turns into this nightclub, which is kind of wild.
And there is a very specific Met Gala that happens in the book, but I don't want to get into that just yet because I want to make a note that this is really the first time you've taken your readers away from New York to tell your story. I know you've traveled to Egypt. Now, did you do that after you decided to write this book, or did a trip there introduce you to the real life pharaoh who inspired the one in your story?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In fact, I thought about doing a book at the Met and then realized I would need to do it in the Egyptian collection, that would be an important part of the story. And that's when I thought I have to go back. And yeah, I've never been out of New York in my books. And readers have always asked me, oh, when are you going to go somewhere else? And I thought, oh, Egypt, like you would never expect. That's where I would go next. And so I thought I have to set part of the book there. And the 1930s were so interesting in terms of what was being discovered in the archaeological field in Egypt. And so we took a trip for 10 days, and we went to Cairo, and we sailed up the Nile and saw the Temple of Karnak and the pyramids and the Valley of the Kings, and went into King Tut's tomb. It was just incredible. It was a really great trip. And so that's where that all sort of came from of, all right, let's see if we can partly set it in Egypt in order to show what this female curator, Charlotte, has gone through and why she is the way she is today.
And I can tell that the way they drive in Cairo really made an impression on you as well.
Yeah. The Cairo was just a fascinating city. And so in Cairo, I went to see this mummy of this pharaoh who I'd become basically obsessed with. And in the book, Charlotte becomes obsessed with her as well. Her real name was Hatshepsut. In the book, she's called Hatherkare because I had to change a lot of timing and facts around her. in order to make it work with the plot. And I didn't want readers emailing me and going, "You got that wrong." And
The
so
Egyptologists out there getting on your case, right?
yeah, right. There's always one. And I thought it'd be better to just rename her and, in the author's note, make it very clear that she's inspired by Hatshepsut, who was this incredible female pharaoh who, she had this amazing reign as regent when the pharaoh in training, I guess, was only an infant. She took over to rule as regent, and she was very successful for 20 years. And then she died, and then a lot of her statues were destroyed, and she really was erased from history to the point where the Met, they were doing some excavations in the 1920s, and they found this quarry filled with these beautiful statues. And they realized, oh no, Hatshepsut was an important pharaoh. But, the pharaoh in training must have really hated her to destroy all of her images. And to the point where the catalog at the Met in the 50s, they call her a vain, ambitious, and unscrupulous woman and a detested stepmother. And so, they basically completely dismiss her. And then later they realized that, in fact, the destruction happened much later, and there was different reasons for it that had to do with the line of succession. And so suddenly she was revered again. And I thought, this poor woman's been dead for thousands of years. And we went from being revered to erased to reviled, and then finally, rediscovered. And I thought that was a very unusual tracking. And so Charlotte in the book almost has a similar journey in terms of her character of figuring out who she is in the world and what she wants and how to get over this kind of box that she's placed herself in.
It's really, though, it's become not uncommon that these historic female characters kind of have this story arc where they were powerful during their day, and then some men came back and wrote history about them that painted them in a bad light, and now we're just learning some of their stories of how great they really were.
It's so true. You're absolutely right. I think it happens over and over and over. And it's because the men were the chroniclers at that time. So they got to choose who made it into the book. And, a lot of women were just completely dismissed or maligned or just misunderstood.
So you changed the name of your pharaoh, but there are some real life people in this book, including fashion editor Diana Veerland, or Diana, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was she really as eccentric in real life as you portray her in this book?
Oh, absolutely. She was incredible. In fact, a lot of what she says in the book are things she actually said, because she
It's very much word salad.
Yes, very much. But in the end, you're like, okay, I understand what she's talking about. I don't really, but I do. And she was this incredible woman. She was born in Paris, and her mother always told her she was ugly. And she went on to become this iconic fashion leader of running Harper's Magazine and Vogue. And eventually she was named special consultant to the Met Gala in the 70s. And she's the one who turned it around from a kind of boring luncheon into the party of the year with Mick Jagger and Diana Ross and Jackie O showing up. And, she was really eccentric. She was very striking looking, and she accentuated that. So she wore rouge that went to her earlobes. She had black lacquered hair and very pale skin. She put Vaseline above her eyes to highlight them. And she just kind of embraced her differences and celebrated them. And then she discovered models like Angelica Houston and Lauren Hutton, who were also not your typical American pretty girl. And so she really was quite a leader and a trailblazer in many ways. And so I knew I had to include her in the book because she just was who she is. You can't make another, And so I thought, let's just go with the real one, and let's see what happens. And I have to say, it was so much fun. Every scene she was in, I had a blast.
She seemed like she was a really fun character to write. And I have to ask, the gala that she oversees in your book, is that historically accurate as in terms of theme and the people who went there and what they were wearing?
Absolutely. In fact, the Met has a wonderful library called the Watson Library, where I went through, I could see photos of the exhibit and press releases and reviews. And so I was really able to recreate it in the book, where it was celebrating this Diaghilev, who was a founder and a director of a ballet company in the early 1900s. And he really revolutionized art and culture and dance at that time. And so the costumes were really kind of wildly colored and not what you expect from ballet costumes. And so there were a lot of those. There were watercolors of the sets, and then there were stuffed peacocks, because why not? There was a Rodin sculpture, and Deanna Vreeland insisted that they pump in perfume into the exhibit hall because she wanted to, have control over even the scent of the room. So that was all very specific.
Without giving anything away, and you can just answer yes or no, that'll suffice for my curiosity. I'm going to assume nothing like your climactic scene during the Met Gala ever really happened.
It did not. That is absolutely fictional. But, I needed a turning point in the book, and I knew it was going to happen the night of the Met Gala. And as a writer, I just asked myself, what's the worst thing that could happen? and that the idea came to me, and I just started laughing, and I said, I have to do it. And that was another scene that was a blast to write, because it really throws our two protagonists together, and then they have to, they're very different in age and temperament, in what they love about life. One loves fashion, one loves ancient art, and together they have to try and solve this mystery.
You mentioned your two protagonists. I really love the relationship between Charlotte and Annie, who's the younger character. And it's more than just Annie looking to fill the void that her emotionally absent mother can't fill. It really does feel like they each complement each other in the way a best friend would.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of Thelma and Louise meets Indiana Jones meets The Devil Wears Prada with this book. And yeah, I wanted them to be very different, but at the same time, they have something that the other one needs in terms of healing. And for Charlotte, in terms of healing from a terrible tragedy that she lived through when she was in Egypt. And then for Annie, for figuring out who she is, because she's always identified as someone who, she's the typical parentified child who she takes care of her mother, and she revolves around other people. And I wanted her to learn how to stand on her own and be in the spotlight over the course of the story.
In your story, Hatshepsut has her legacy stolen by when the images of her destroyed. And very early on in the book, Charlotte muses about her own legacy and what that might look like. And it's really an idea that women traditionally haven't really been encouraged to think about beyond maybe their children and what their children might do in the world. What do you hope your legacy might be?
Oh, what a grand question. Wow. Yeah, you're right about, I think, women, and I don't have children, which is why I wanted to kind of go into a mother-daughter relationship in this book, because it's not something I've done before. And yeah, it's interesting as you see your parents pass away, and and you think about what you leave behind. For me, I never wanted children, so it wasn't, it just wasn't something I considered. And in terms of writing books, I love the fact that these books will last after I'm gone, that someone will still find them in a thrift store somewhere or something, but that they'll still carry on. But it's not something that I planned. The way I came to be a writer was very kind of organic, and, well, I want to write about this, but I can't do it as an article, so I'll do it as a book. And then suddenly I was launched on this completely different path in my mid-40s, in fact, when I was 50. And so, to me, that's nice to leave something creative in the world is a wonderful thing to do. And I think a lot of women we're trained to think short term, and all right, let's get the kids into college. Let's, take care of this, take care of that. And you're just crossing things off a list, and to sit back and think, okay, what do I want in 5 years? And what do I want in 10 years? And I do that every 5 years. I sit down and I reassess, what do I want next? And I think that helps to think of things in the bigger picture, which is always a good idea.
I love too that any woman out there listening who hears that your first book wasn't published till you're 50, if she feels she's got a book in her, that it's never too late to sit down, write it, and get it out there into the world.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I couldn't have written a book when I was in my 20s because I didn't know myself and I hadn't lived. And it wasn't until I had gone through some experiences and come out the other end that I actually had something to put on the page. And so, yeah, I encourage people to, don't feel like there's any rush. You don't have to, be 30 under 30 or anything. It's better to wait and have something fun to play around with on the page.
So I first got to hear you talk about this book at an event you did in the fall with a bunch of us media folks. And I want to ask you the same question now that I asked you then, which is, now that you've opened the door to a second location for your stories, is that something you want to explore again in a future book?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's fun to branch out. To be honest, the next book is still set in New York.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and it's just the way the story worked out. But I'm thinking maybe the book after that is going to be something a little different, because it's fun to change things up. And that will be my 9th book, the next one, and I think it's fun to try something different. And I think these days authors are encouraged to branch out and try something unusual. So yeah, we'll see what comes down the pike. But I loved going to Egypt and writing off the trip. So hey.
You have to think of a place that you really have always wanted to go and find a way to get a book out of it.
That's it. I think you're right. That's why I never mind like starting with the building. Let's just start with the country. I like that.
I mean, do you ever think you'll run out of places in New York to write about?
There are so many. And I joke around, by the 18th book, I'll be doing the gas station on the corner of 11th Avenue or something. But
hey, it's a rarity. It's like one of the only ones left in Manhattan,
that's
right?
Right. I think there's only 2 or 3. But yeah, there's a lot here in New York, but I think it would be fun to do London, because my parents are both English and I lived there my junior year in college. So I would love to go back there and try something there, because I think it's fun to give yourself it's like a reboot in a way when I'm not in New York. It's, I have to translate everything differently. And I know New York so well. I've lived here for almost 40 years now, that in a way it's too easy, and it might be fun to make myself work a little harder.
Well, I know however you apply yourself, the book is going to be a wonderful read. The newest is The Stolen Queen. Fiona Davis, thank you so much for spending some time with me today to talk about it.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate this, and excellent questions. That was fun.
And that's where we close the book on this chapter. If a trip to Egypt or New York City isn't in the cards for you, and you want to learn more about the real-life pharaoh Hatshepsut or the Met Museum, don't miss the list of books Fiona has in her author's note. I've also shared it on my Patreon page. Just go to patreon.com/LisaTBooks and sign up to support this podcast and get access to extra features. I really couldn't do this without you, Next time, love is in the air. Or maybe it isn't. I've got a deep TBR pile before I decide whether to feature a romance book for Valentine's Day or switch it up and do something completely different. Have an opinion? Hit me up on Instagram @LisaTBooks. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Lisa T. Keep turning those pages.